So here we are again with the cooler, and this is the portion of the hinge that we're going to remove. Remember, these are made in China, so they are metric. I think this is 10 millimeter. Yeah, this is a 10 millimeter. Now you have to be careful because the door, since it is made out of double glass and metal, it's kind of heavy. So be sure that when you remove this hinge that you don't just allow this thing to go ahead and fall in your lap. If you have someone to help you, that's great. You don't necessarily need it, but if you're a little queasy about potentially dropping the door, you might want to have a friend help you out with removing the screws while you hold the door, or vice versa. But if you leave this door closed, since it does have a magnetic gasket, it does make it easier. And of course, I use electric tools, so that helps to it. You don't have to put two hands on them. So what I'm going to do is basically pull one screw out completely, and then just loosen the other one to the point where I can lift the hinge out of place, and you'll see. On this particular cooler, the top hinge has this cover, and it's got a single Phillips screw right here. And all you need to do is loosen that, remove the screw, and the cover comes right off. I have also removed this bottom cover. There are just two screws which hold this cover in place. And you can see the screw hole that goes into the cooler there, two Phillips screws. So I went ahead and removed that. And we'll take a closer look here a bit at the bottom hinge bracket. And if you want to reverse the door, which I'm going to eventually end up doing, what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and remove that, and then we're going to place it on the other side. And if you'll notice here, there are two identical holes with bolts to fill them here on this side. So we just swap that bracket and then turn the door over. Now the door is essentially free to fall off, so we're just going to take it, pull it out a little bit, and lift it up out of the other hinge. And this probably is the gist of the weight of the cooler. This thing's probably about 30 pounds. Now let's talk a little bit about storing the door. What's important about that is the hinge on it actually compresses some. In that original statement where I said hinge, what I really meant to say was gasket. As you can see, the gasket on this door is a soft rubber and actually magnetic material, and it can be compressed. So bear in mind when you remove the door and you lean it up against something, be mindful that you don't press something against it which might leave a lasting impression. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes, a couple of things to keep in mind here is as you remove parts, it makes sense to try and put them in a safe place and a place where you can, of course, find them again and relocate them and put them back in to your project. I use a lot of these generic type containers. I suggest that you do something the same. Again, it's just going to help you later in putting the project back together again if you keep your parts in a convenient location. Now, one of the other things that I can suggest that you do is that you can remove items, say such as these screws, and you can put them back in the original screw holes. And if you do that, then at the end, you'll remember what fasteners went into what portion. The next step for us is going to be further removal of items that we're going to want to have out of the way that we will eventually be either modifying, replacing, adding to. But since there's more work to be done on the interior of the cooler, what we're going to do is we're going to take out the original controller, but we're going to save the housing because we're actually going to mount the new CigarClimatology controller, because it just coincidentally happens to fit in the same spot with the modification some of this housing. And this particular cooler has a fan, an additional fan back here in the back that's designed to blow on the back. And since this is a beverage cooler, really, and not a wine cooler, quote unquote, it's one of the differences between the two different models. So I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. I'm probably going to walk in front of the camera a lot. You're not going to be able to see a lot. But the fact is that there are only really two fasteners that hold this controller in, and they are Phillips fasteners. There you go. And again, I'm going to use my impact gun to remove them, but they're easy to remove by hand. And then typically there will be a couple of catches back here on the back that allow this to drop down and pivot out. I'll try to move out of the way some so that you can see how I remove it. So this is a slightly better view for you guys of what it is that we're going to be removing. And maybe when this is out of the way, you might be able to get a glimpse of the fan, which is back up in this area. Again, extremely important, make sure that the tool, if you're using any type of impact tool or electric tool, is spinning the right direction so that you don't do damage to the fasteners and to the threads. There's one. Okay, there's two. Finding the end of the screw up in the hole can sometimes be a little bit difficult. You just have to be patient. So now that's you can see that we've just gone ahead and dropped that down. Take the two screws and put them aside and examine what we have here. In this particular fridge, you just pull this forward a little bit, and now you can see it's just completely dangling by the attached wires. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pull these guys off. There's one, and they have a little clip that holds them in place, some of them. There's two, and there's three. I don't know if you can see the fan or not, but there's the fan that we're going to remove there in the background. I'll zoom in a little more. So here's the back fan in the background, and it also has two screws that just hold it up to the roof of the cooler like this. Again, we're just going to get back there and pop those out. And if you can see it, there's simply a small micro type connector, so we don't have to cut anything. We're going to go ahead and disconnect that. What I think I'm also going to try and do with this particular unit is this has a couple of LED lights which I've tested previously, and not in this cooler but in another cooler, and they're 12 volt DC. So it might be kind of nice to keep those intact. So rather than dispose of all this, although I might have to cut out this portion of the assembly, and if I do, it might be better just to dispose of this. But we'll see. I'm going to try and save it. What we're going to do here in the not too distant future is I'll show you how to disassemble this. Most of what is in here is basically just garbage, but I don't really just like to yank it out. I like to take it out the correct way and try and avoid damaging it. And then we're going to go ahead and mount the new controller assembly in here, and then we'll just set it aside. But as for right now, two items we don't need. I'm just going to set them aside. Now, something to note here about existing wiring. As a general rule, I like to try and preserve all the existing wiring. I don't know why. It's just my nature. And take this wiring and just push it back up in the hole. For right now, I'm just going to leave it dangle here. There is, of course, always a possibility that if you wanted to use this wiring for something, you could. You could cut the connectors off, you could wire to it, you could trace them back to the back. The important part of the kit is, since I don't want to rely on that, if you cut or break one of these wires, or if you're making some other hole in the cooler, which we're going to down here in this corner, and you breach or destroy one or more of these wires, now suddenly you're in a quandary as to what circuit you're going to use, or how you're going to use it, or how you're going to connect something. So we're going to try and avoid that, or I do avoid that, by supplying all the wiring necessary to complete your cooler in your kit. So when you get a wiring harness from me, it's while it eventually will end up running on the inside of the cooler and not nicely through the cooler, those are things you could potentially do if you can salvage these wires and identify them. What I don't want to do is make it necessary that you salvage those wires and that you reuse those wires, so that if someone does damage one of them, they suddenly have some other kind of problem that they need to wire around. So the whole of the kit, with the exception of maybe the power cord that goes into the wall, will include all the necessary wiring.